This lecture is being recorded, and there will be a question and answer follow-up at the end, so please stay tuned for that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Anderson Lecture Series and what it is about. Dr. John Muller Anderson, Professor Emeritus, was the Ivan Pugh Research Professor of Philosophy and the first director of Penn State's Institute of the Arts and Humanities. His passion for the philosophy of art and painting resulted in his generous gift from which we, as a community, have greatly benefited. The John Muller Anderson Endowment in Visual Arts was established in 2001 with the purpose of supporting outstanding programming, such as this lecture series and related activities with guest artists that we bring to our campuses to interact with our students and community. All Anderson events are free of charge and open to the public, so I do encourage you to bring someone whenever you come along. I want to thank the former director of the School of Visual Arts, Wagner Mendoka Whitehead, the interim director, Eduardo Navas, and my SOVA colleagues in the Events and Award Committee, who have and continue to greatly contribute to the smooth and successful carrying out of this series that we would be experiencing. We still have one more. As I mentioned already, there will be a Q&A session after the talk, and you are also reminded that this lecture is being recorded and it would be shared internally and externally, such as on the A&A Arts and Architecture College's YouTube channel. So please stay tuned for that and re-watch it whenever necessary. At this point, I would be introducing our artist, Yaw Owusu. Artist Yaw Owusu creates sculptural paintings and installations by transforming otherwise worthless materials into valuable objects and encounters. He uses the smallest denomination of currencies, which are coins, stainless steel, wood, copper, found objects, and social engagements. Through processes involving oxidation, plating, and other experimental activities that alter the texture and color of these materials into anything but their natural qualities, akin to the minting of coins today. His work penetrates the histories of trade, exchange, and labor, questioning the foundation of contemporary economies while exploring the transient nature of value across various cultural and economic contexts. Owusu's works have been exhibited across the world in both private and public institutions, including the Brooklyn Museum, Museum of African Contemporary Art, Almaden, Institute of Contemporary Art, San Diego, Sotheby's Institute, New York, Gallery 1957, London and Accra, Efie Gallery, UAE, Ross and Kramer Gallery, New York, Christie's, London, Johnson Lowy Gallery, Atlanta, University of Delaware, Museum of Science and Technology in Ghana, among many others. I encountered Owusu's work when I was in graduate school and thinking about color choice and materiality in my work. Upon contacting him, his personality, faith, and willingness to address my issues surprised me, and I immediately understood his passion for finding value in everything and everywhere. Owusu's zeal and courage in approaching the most sought-after material on earth, which is money, as a medium of his art expanded my approach in material choices, conceptualization, and life as an artist. And it is with the same reason I invite him to the podium to share many more with us. With an applause, let us welcome artist Yaw Owusu.
Good morning, everybody. As you mentioned, my name is Yaw Owusu, and I want to say that I'm an artist, but for the most part, I've been trying to make art. In 2007, Ghana, which is where I was born and raised for the most part, introduced this coin, a new currency that replaced the old currency. And the whole idea was to curb inflation, stabilize the economy. And the currency was made of copper. This is the least currency, which is at the time was equivalent to the penny here. But then I I've studied arts all my life. I went to high school, studied art, textiles, sculpture. I did chemistry. And in my undergrad, I studied painting and sculpture. So I've been painting all my life. But then at a point, it felt redundant because I had the skill, which is like mostly we were formerly Western trained. So um, still live drawings and paintings and all. But it became redundant because all I could express was the skill, and it was good to people's eyes and all of that. But I wanted something more. I grew up with a dad who was an educationist. So I grew up in a library sort of a house where collections of books around the world, tests, newspapers, and stuff like that from across the world that mostly talked about politics. So imagine from childhood, I've been fed with the ideas of political um, discussions. His friends, be lawyers, whatever, politicians, they were always talking politics. So I was interested in the idea of politics as well. But then at a trip to the coastal area of Ghana, I was doing a pinhole camera project for my painting class. And then when I came back a few days later, I realized that the pesos, pennies that I had changed color and texture because it came in contact with the seawater. So for the next few years from my second year in undergrad, I experimented with ways to generate color and texture so I could now, instead of using acrylic or oils, paint with this new material, this new form of color and texture. So I did experimentations and still be doing experimentations over the years to get these colors and textures. But then the still desire and almost like the kind of intuitive idea of politics and economics became apparent. I'm using money, and I wanted to understand what money was for. And I realized that the money was being made in Canada by the Royal Canadian Mint and then shipped to Ghana. Now, if you know Ghana, Ghana is one of the world leading producers or exporters of gold and a lot of raw materials. So basically, the raw material is dug or taken from Ghana, moved to Canada, produced into currency, brought back to Ghana, and used as money. So that idea became very interesting to me, thinking about imperialism, thinking about colonialism, thinking about there was this book that I read a few years ago or a number of years ago called, it's a test, The Periplus of the Eritrean Sea, where it was talking about the voyages and how materials led people to trade, how it led people to like exchange and all of that. So it was interesting to see how material could move from one place to the other and get transformed and come back to the same place as another object. And so I began making works that reflected the idea of maps. Also, Ghana's work railway station was built around where resources were, where raw materials were. So it wasn't necessarily for transportation of people, but it was just where when gold was extracted, how it gets to the closest port to be exported here, same as slavery or slave trade, and how people moved as objects of valuable labor, to these places and all of that. So the works were almost like topographical or geographical. But then also because I'm using something very small, it's the penny. I was interested in the idea of scale, that because you need like 1,000 to get $10, right? So to make a work, I need like 50,000 to make an impact, to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. So I was making installations and works like that while I was treating them. And also, I love the idea of uh, of structure or infrastructure or systems. Um, System B, systems of politics, for a country to be a Gold Coast, have a lot of financial resources, but still be managed by the IMF, the World Bank, and European and kind of foreign political powers. It was interesting to me to know the value of our political systems in place. So some of the works were almost kind of interrogate him with these architectural structures as well. So you have these works that were hanging from pillars or columns to interrogate what systems mean, how it holds other systems in place, capitalism, stuff like that. Also the idea of circulation, how money and wealth is distributed. So those ideas were informing the forms that I would make. Yeah, and these are back in about 10, 11 years ago. And also, I did this project where it was a collapsed railway station. And a friend of mine was creating a show, and she was like, well, you know, this is an outdoor space, so you can't make works that you could put it, there's a potential that the works could be destroyed by weather, by people. So it has to be something that you are able to like kind of let go. And when I visited the space, I realized that, well, it has these walls, right? And it's a collapse system, right? It's from the colonial times, but it's not functioning anymore. So I made these fabrics that were almost like it's covering the columns, it's covering the structures or the pillars that hold the building together, almost like mimicking a non-functional function. It's like it's supposed to be a pillar, but it's actually not working. So I made these, and that was the first time I was making anything on canvas, because then I could mold it, or it could mold and form itself around anything and pretend to be doing something. And as you can imagine, of course, it was open to the public, so people could, it's money and people could take and all. So I got a few back, but the most part was gone. Um, and then it was our 60th, I think 50th or 60th independence, and there was this street festival, and then I got commissioned to make a piece for the festival. And I was thinking of what it means to be independent, being economically as a country. Um, so I made the flag, which was really, it was pretty sizable, about this wall, maybe a little bigger. And then it was hanging against a female prison, an old colonial kind of dating back to the slave trade system called the Asher Fort. But then the whole idea was like placing the flag against these systems that almost manipulated or controlled us. And at the time, I was younger. Um, so I made something beautiful. So my thought was that, you know, I get to keep it. But then it was also in the place where one of the most impoverished neighborhoods, and people came, and this is just within a few hours, and you can see it's already coming down. People came and they were interacting with it, taking out the coins, and I was pissed. I was really pissed. Uh, but I didn't understand what was happening at the time. In my imagination, because I was trained as a formal painter, my imagination is that the work exists and then it gets taken from place to place. But later on, I understood that the kid will come with books and all that, uh, sort of collect the coins. But years later, or a few years later, I realized that the work that was made, that what I was made, sorry, was not actually the objects that I produced. It was the interaction with the people, what money meant to them, what um, value meant to them. And that interaction, I think, till today, is what the work was about. Uh, and and then I moved to New York, and still thinking about the idea of value. New York obviously is one of the most expensive places to live, one of the wealthiest states or places on earth. And what does money mean? Also thinking about Wall Street and all of that, where we trade in like dots, almost like the least of currencies, which is the penny, and sometimes even lesser than pennies. Like, what does it mean? And also, I was thinking about how people were paid, how much they were paid, who gets paid more or less, and how people survive in New York. So I made this postcard, and I went to like train stations, like squares, Times Square, Wall Street, Grand Central, Central Park, like places where people were uh, trading time, like the stations people were after something or getting to something, movement, exchange of time, and how time was valuable. So I'll stop people to have a conversation on currency, which is like a penny. And imagine asking somebody on from Wall Street what they would do for a penny is stop them for a minute to think about what value is. And I was actually paying them back a penny when they get to answer the postcard, and then I'll collect their answers. So I did this and collected these responses across like the demographic was different, was really wide. Also, like classes was really wide, but we are having a mere conversation on the idea of a penny of value. Um, and the responses, you could just imagine how what people would write over a penny because it was very ambiguous, right? Um, what value was. Yeah. And it was around the time where the ICE were arresting a lot of people, immigrants, illegal immigrants, sort of. But I had a backpack, right? And I would dip my hand into it and then pull the postcards when I was doing this on the streets of New York. My stupid self at the time didn't realize how vulnerable and dangerous that is because to approach a stranger and then put your hand into a backpack and pull something towards them. I was doing that to the police and they would step back. But I didn't, in a moment, I didn't realize how dangerous it was. And when I presented the project, people asked like, "Who were you with? Like, were you safe? Did you think about safety and all of that?" So for a minute, I had never thought about how we navigate spaces, like how our bodies also move through spaces. It's just like how currency, you never know where money has been, but you touch it, you use it, and all of that. So I became, and then thinking about being almost like a foreigner at the time. I wasn't a U.S. citizen at the time, so the restrictions, and I was navigating the system as a foreign student, uh, sort of, and how other people were being treated during that time when they were arrested as illegal immigrants. So the idea of like almost like a picket fence and who gets to be an outsider, who gets to be an insider, what it means to be excluded, and all of that, these boundaries that separates us based on so many kind of categorizations was interesting for me. So I was making um, these installations that reflected the time, reflected the conditions, and the value that was placed on people. At one time, one of the camps where the kids that were arrested were or taken had these um, uh, emergency blankets as like coverings for them in the cold and all of that, and it was that's the value we place on people for being an outsider, and I thought that was interesting. So once again, I thought about the idea of like exclusion, the idea of like blocking entryways for people to get into it, and how we navigate that, and using a coin which has uh, from since 1905 embedded, and even before the word liberty. You know, what does liberty mean? Like, what's the value of freedom and liberty and stuff like that? And being the least currency, I thought it was interesting. And then in 2020, uh, there were a lot of protests across the country and even across the world on Black lives and what it means. And I felt that so the penny has Abraham Lincoln on it. It has liberty. It has time. Lincoln known for his abolition of slave trade, so almost like liberation, liberty meaning people who are free, and at times. And in 1920, Marcus Garvey had introduced a flag that was a representation of almost like the Black nationhood or Blackhood. And it was a green, black, and red flag, striped, three stripes. And in 1980, David Hammond, the artist, made took these colors and made it into the American flag. And that was his interpretation of Black lives, being a part of this system, being a part of this nation. So in 2021, whilst we were almost having the same conversation that had been fought 100 years ago, it was quite interesting that, hey, so what's happened between these times? And I found a coin, actually. One beautiful thing is, like, most of the works that I make with the pennies can date back to like 1900 or something like that. The dates are very wide. But I found a 1920 coin, and I thought that was really interesting to make a work that's 100 years old in 2020, to talk about an issue that's like beyond 100 years old in 2020. So I made this flag with a coin that ranged from 1920 to 2020. And it was a question of what value is on people, especially on Black people. And I think it was a very strong piece that till this day almost sparks a lot of conversation around uh, Blackness, or Black lives and the value placed on them, be it labor, be it their existence, be it their common humanity. Yeah, and then COVID. It was during COVID, so I had a commission. Well, was it a commission? I wanted to make a big piece, for my final year, my thesis at Pratt, but we got closed down, so it wasn't happening. And I had these panels, but then I had a commission that I needed to make, but then I wasn't getting the shops. The shops were closed, so I wasn't getting the aluminum panels that I needed. So I wanted to scrape off the work that I had already made, so I can use the panels. While I was, and this was in 2021, and while I was taking off the coins to build a new one, it reminded me of Tulsa, the Black Wall Street. Sure, kind of familiar with. So the idea of almost an economy being raised, the idea or something that has been built is almost being burned down, that being raised significantly. Just this action, like taking something down to replace it with something else. So this is, and it left these kind of marks on the panel, and I thought it was really, really beautiful in terms of like how memories almost or history cannot be erased. So be that it was like Lincoln's head, or the federal buildings, or like the inscriptions of the penny, those marks were still there. And I thought I could leave some of the coins in existence, and then leave some of the marks or the memories in existence. And I reached out for maps of Tulsa when they were burned down and all that. And I kind of overlaid them, almost twisted them, and then built this work that had like the old, the erased, and then something new that was almost like washing away this history or something like that. So I'm almost covering over the history in 2021. And once again, I thought that the power of the work wasn't necessarily now the object. It was now the absence of the object as well, and the marks that has been made, and the histories that it carried over time. And this is, I think the work is in the World Museum in Netherlands, and it was a privilege to have Yinka Sonibari, who's also talking about these issues of appropriation, of value, through the Africanness. And it was interesting to have them like almost opposite each other. And also using steel, which is like one of the fundamental materials that builds the economy of the US. And it changed the course of movement, of migration from the South to the East Coast, especially being here in Pennsylvania, how the factories here in Pennsylvania changed the course of the U.S. economic history as well. And then it was still locked down, I think in 2020. So I had these steel discs that I was going to use for a different project, but because it was locked down, I didn't have any studio. And I was with my brother who had a bigger house and stuff in Ohio. So I was like, I got bored being indoors. So I was like, well, actually, since I don't have any place like actually make work and these reactions, how about I let the objects that I have just make the work without me interfering with the treatment or whatever. So these were like, uh, I just placed the decks almost randomly in a park and it reflected the sky. So it was almost like I have dug holes through the earth and then you could see through the earth into another sky and all of that. The idea of how objects interact with space, how the absence of our bodies um, and presence almost change space. So like in this installation, you can see just his presence almost kind of activates the work for you to see that there's an object there. Um, and how I could also like break away from just the idea of currency and circulation or presence or absence, but then have the objects just exist as is. And I did this at a few places as well. I actually did this at a beach also, and the ocean, and the sky, and it was actually really interesting without people and just having the work um, do its thing. You know. And then I I uh, I had a project in the UAE. Um, but then before it was supposed to be like a residency leading to a solo show. But before I did that, I was like, before I make the work, let me just imagine because we all have an idea of what Dubai is. It's flamboyance, whatever, flashy, blah, blah, blah. Let me make some of the work in New York, but with almost like Google searches of what a place looked like, almost like how we project our thoughts on things, on place, on people, how we assume things to be. So I did a lot of searches, and it was all these almost like futuristic buildings, and this is actually what it looks like. So the works that I made were almost futuristic in the structure of it. Um, Almost trying to understand what it means, what value means in a place that's almost like approached us or very luxurious or very wealthy. So the form changed into these complex structures, like complex ideas of form, almost luxurious and all of that. But then I go to the UAE or Dubai, and it was in collaboration with the Dubai culture. So now I'm interacting with the actual people, getting to understand their culture, sitting with them, learning from their histories and all of that, being in the desert. And actually, this is how they cook their meat. So like going into their traditional practices. And funny enough, these guys are all billionaires in a sort, like very important people, like Supreme Court judges and all of that. But then they were still kind of attached to their traditional self, right? And it gave me a whole new idea or like a whole new perspective of what the projection of place and value is, and what they also deemed valuable to them, because these were like their ancient architecture, and then the work changed into more kind of traditional. I was trying to understand the separation between culture and religion, the separation between the modern day and traditional kind of economic settings and all of that. So the works change into like these kind of Asian things and reflecting the architecture, reflecting their culture and history, and almost paying respect to that. So it changed my idea of what value is, or trying to understand what value is in UAE. It changed the work. So that incorporated some of their coins, which they don't use mostly, but then most importantly, integrating culture into something that is almost like a new age. Yeah. And then I came to San Diego, where I had a residency and a show at the ICA San Diego. But San Diego is at the border of Mexico, Tijuana, Mexico. And Tijuana is mostly actually this city or town what came about where people were trying to get into the US and they stopped there before they crossed over. So it's a kind of a point of transition of movement, right? Um, so I went there, and then the same project that I did in New York, asking people what they would do with a penny, but here I was asking them what they would do for a penny. Um, and it was right outside where penny was irrelevant. It wasn't used. So I got their responses, and it was interesting having a conversation around something that is almost irrelevant but valuable uh, outside the walls of the US with the US penny. And once again, I'll pay them for their responses and collect their response. I honestly don't know what I'll do with the response yet, but maybe in a few years I would. But yeah, so I collected that. But the whole point of my visit was to understand the idea of separation because it's the same land. This is here on the shore is Tijuana, is Mexico, and on the other side it's US. But then just this wall, the presence of this wall, separate people, separate economies, separate cultures, separate like a lot of understanding. And I was trying to understand that. But then I found this wall very interesting because it was on the wall on the Mexican side. It was used as a kind of activism or protest where these names were names of U.S. soldiers who were from Tijuana or Mexico who were promised that they'll get citizenship when they join, but then it never happened. So they'll use that as a place where they did a lot of political kind of activism or questions or stuff like that. So it became interesting for me to build this work that had like it was slanted purposely where from one side it almost like looked like you're looking through spaces and then on the other side it flashes. So from one side it's just the spaces in between and these black lines and a little bit of the coin on top. But from the other side, it flattens for you to see almost like one huge canvas or structure. And also the idea of like blockages and then openings and who gets the access to the other. I thought it was interesting for me. So I built that installation for that. And uh, I came to Pittsburgh here in Pennsylvania for another residency. But here, I was interested in knowing how the materials shaped the economy, while something as ordinary as steel could change a lot of things. So I visited a few of the collapsed steel factories, specifically the Bethlehem steel factory, which uh, was where most of the warships were built. A lot of buildings had their steel from here. A lot of money was made here. Like I said, during the industrial evolution, a lot of movement across the country was moving towards these industries because that's one of the only places that you could find work. Um, and how it changed demographics as well, how it informed migration from international Irish coming in, the English, all of that. So it was interesting to see these kind of fundamental structures almost collapsed and resting. So I took a lot of inspiration from from that. And then, yeah, this is what, and plus many more of what this infrastructure has contributed to, like it almost like built part of America's economic history. And I made this installation from that. But then the interesting thing about the installation was that it almost brought this memory to life. So it was tied to like a vapor machine, and then almost sparking this turn. Yeah, and it was timed, so it will come on for like 30 seconds, go off for 30 seconds, and come on for 30 seconds. But the idea of bringing memory back to life, the idea of almost like revisiting the past whilst in the present. Because like I said, the pennies could take me to like time. There are pennies from 1880 something that I have, and I can use it now. So it became something really interesting that I explored. And also how much I could also transform these materials into something, because the coins, the sheets were blue sheets that I transformed into material. Yeah, and I'm curious to see what it transforms into over time as well, with these reactions happening as it. And then I went back to Ghana after a very long time for another residency and a solo show. But when I went, the idea was for me to, well, I became interested in almost revisiting also my history and heritage as well. So I took one object called the Kente fabric, which has like a lot of motifs, signs, like language, be artistry or almost traditional, and trying to see how we could interpret or reinterpret these traditional motifs and then into real times, like how these almost scientific kind of representations of form or motifs are interpreted today. So I built works that were, and over time, I've been doing a lot of geometric abstraction, but now it made sense because I was revisiting something that had already used, I've seen happen, I've seen used, I've seen worn as something, one of our very most valuable materials or historic objects. It's also, even though it's a fabric, it's considered as currency as well. It's bright price, it's gifts, valuable gifts, and all. So reinterpreting these motifs, the idea of heritage, the idea of value through objects. I built these works and built from the complexity of it in today's world. Also experimented with the idea of duality, something that you could almost visit the past and now and reinterpret that, and had that in the show. Also, I play with scale a lot. Like I said, I'm using a very minute or tiny object. So what if you blow it up? Experimenting with steel, with copper, alongside the pesos and penny and what money could be. And then in New York, over the years, I've been doing this project that perhaps like nobody knows of. But these coin style machines, when you have loose change, you could exchange virtual currency. So I thought about, well, what if I transform these pennies into like, say, gold pennies and put them back into these systems, because it gets recirculated back into the system. So I did that. I changed the pennies to gold, sort of, and put them back. And put them back into circulation. And my whole objective was to try to understand when people get this, what does it become? Does it become more valuable than the actual penny? Does it become a collectible? Does it become uh, now a prized object and not currency? Does it become exchangeable? Like all these ideas, like almost transforming one object from one value to the other one, as I've been experimenting with. So I did, and God knows, about 100,000 pieces of that, and then pushed it back into the system. But it's still ongoing. Maybe I'll hit like 1 million pieces. But the whole idea is, when people get this, will they throw them back into the system? Will they keep them? Uh, Almost like the fundamentals of capitalism, how value is built, how value is kept, how value is distributed. So I did that over the time. And right near my studio, I have there's this basketball court, and it has this court as well, but it's mostly not used. It's dirty most of the time. I had cleaned this. I should have taken a photo when it was dirty. But I was thinking most of my work ends up in almost like white cube spaces, like curator spaces, being museums or institutions or galleries, being private collections where people understand art in itself. So they're collecting for art's sake. But what does it mean when like these objects are in redundant spaces as well? And it's like, without context, how do people interact with it? So was about, I think, a 50-foot wall or something. And I made this installation and just placed it there without context, just so the community also could enjoy what art is, or interact with these kind of almost ambiguous objects in, like I said, in redundant spaces. And also how art oftentimes is looked like, you know, something very specific, like you need context to like stand in front of it, contemplate it. But then how art could be playful in its making, in its almost like sharing, how people could just enjoy art for it being just artsy. Also without context, like what does this become? Is it even art, or is it just a mysterious object that ended up in space? So I had a number of interactions with it, from people just enjoying it, the objects, and even nature playing with it as well. So the work moved from the rigidity of space or context into like this freedom of existence, where um, anybody or anything could interact with it. So I guess this has been some of the projects or processes I've been exploring and experimenting with, thoughts that inform, shape, form my art practice and interests. And I'm grateful that I got a chance to share with you.
Thank you so much, Yaw, for sharing with us your work and making us understand the overlaps between painting and sculpture. Okay, so now I open the floor up for question and answers. If you have any question, kindly raise your hand and I will bring the microphone over to you.
Where do you get the coins for all this? Like, how do you collect them?
That's a good question. When I started, I was getting from people, but I realized like I needed more than people had in jars. So I'll take actual money to the bank and exchange for pennies, and they're heavy, bro.
Did you ever think that that first penny would bring you to like almost around the world doing whole installations like this?
No, not at all. I spent most of the first years trying to get the colors. That kept me in the studio, also trying to build like a context around the object. So I had no idea what forms they could turn into. But along the researches, something interesting will prompt a form or a composition, like the maps prompted the earlier works into like a more topographical forms and shapes. And then it moved on to other interactions or other researches and histories, and that opened up the works this way. And I thought also, I think also like value is almost like very easily adaptable because we all revolve around what value is, be material, be conceptual, be social. So it allows the work to like move into different spaces, and the forms are just enormous. Yeah.
When you see the way people interact with your works differently based on where they're placed, whether that be in different areas of the world or like in a museum, do you kind of see that as a political commentary? Like when early on when people were taking money off of your works, and how that's changed based on where you place the works?
Yeah, I strongly think so. In spaces like this, if I had a show here, it's more intellectual. So a lot of people are approaching the work from a very intellectual, be like aesthetics, artistic, historical, philosophical point of views. In places like the space, the community where the work was, like they don't approach the work from that same lens. So it's always interesting to have like people from different kind of capacities interact with the work, try to digest the work. And it's always like something that I learned from. It's very educative for me. In places like this, I wasn't even there the whole time. I didn't have to be there to see people's interactions, but I would just see an Instagram post of like models modeling in front of it, people making music videos in front of it, and it's out of my control. I think it's always like very beautiful for the work to open up those conversations. Yeah.
I have a question. First of all, the work is really beautiful and thought-provoking, and thanks for sharing it. I have a question about something you touched on and then kind of moved on, and you mentioned colonialism in Ghana, and of course, this is, I think, at the core of so much in the world. um, do you know, is the gold that's in Ghana that's being mined today, is the wealth that's generated by that, does it suffer from the old tradition of colonialism getting exported, or is it helping the economy of Ghana?
That's a really good one. Most until now, I think this year they put kind of an exportation limit to it. So the government has like a full control of how much gold is leaves the country. So now, presumably for the next, moving on from now, the country will have like control for it. But most of the companies that were mining were foreign companies. A lot of about a decade ago, it was a lot of Chinese companies mining. So now you have China being one of the world leading distributors of gold, right? Because they had a lot of mining concessions in Ghana. So for the previous years, for hundreds of years, the country wasn't necessarily benefiting from gold and several other minerals because it was all foreign mandated or controlled.
I have it right here, Grace.
Just, I want to probe you a little bit more about your philosophical frame of reference for using the Pessoa and the juxtaposition between the notion of metal and some almost the fluidity of fabric that you have in your work. But just before that, it was a very interesting question about the mining of gold. There is, in the latest issue of Time magazine, there is an article about the the current conditions and thinking and the way the average person in Ghana is now mining for gold in literally in the streets and in the rural areas. It's an interesting article, and it gets into the philosophical frame of reference about why is this happening and what is it doing to the economy. So that's an interesting dimension that could be added to your presentation. But what I'm very interested in, and I want you to say some more about, I heard a little bit of it in the beginning, about the use of the coin and why and how, what is your thinking about the use of the metal itself and then putting it into some of the patterns of the traditional cloth? What is your thinking? You know, investigate that a little bit more now and tell us some more about that.
Well, that's a really good question. All of it is a really good question.
You know, excuse me, I am having trouble hearing you. I almost attached to the mic.
Yeah, no, I have it here. I'll try and.
You're saying such great things, but it's.
You can't hear it. Okay. I hope you hear me now. So, historically, when the English first encountered the Ashanti Kingdom, they found out that like gold were just like casual ornaments. That's why they called it the Gold Coast, because people had it as amulets, as chains. They were like adorning themselves with like nuggets of gold. So the idea of the metal be like they worshipped it as well, adorned their gods with it and all of that. So idea of the metal in itself had be spiritual value, be cultural value, and also as currency, because then they will trade gold for salt. In the Ashanti Kingdom, there's like in the inner land, so there are no seas to mine salt. So they will kind of trade with the coastal cities or towns with that. So that almost was the foundation of what currency could be. And then the idea that this same object, right, be taken, be the metals, be bauxite or whatever, be taken outside of the country, right? And then when it's coming back as steel plated, copper plated steel, but now stamped with imagery, with text. And that now becomes the standard of transaction or exchange as currency. I think that idea of how an object could move or translate into another object, and then how that value almost translates to another value, became interesting to me. The idea that the same people who colonized us now control our economy and make our money for us and then ship back to us. As an independent country, I thought that was very provocative for me to investigate that idea. And it also gave me a thought about how human beings became objects of value. Their labor now became tradable or transactional. So we will buy humans, ship them here as workers or free labor, and use them to like build economies and all of that. So almost like the translation of objects and materials to the point where human beings became almost like the same objects that could, be tradable or transferable. And I wouldn't perhaps like have used the penny as much until it had Lincoln's liberation on, until it had the reference of the Black liberation on. Then now the value of liberation became interesting to me. And that's how I've been probing that idea of value through objects, through context, be social, economic, or historical. And then I could make these works that almost interrogate space, interrogate history and economies as same.
I was wondering what the process of making and distributing like the gold pennies was. Like, how did you make them? Were there like any, this is a weird question. Were there any legal processes that you had to like make sure you, I don't know. But like, yeah.
Um, okay. Oh, I mean, legality. Okay. For the legal side, I try not to really worry myself about. I think that art in itself is political. Art, it's should be uncomfortable in its process of making, in its process of actually enjoying or encountering it. And from that stance, do I use the material? I want it to be as provocative and as ambitious as I could be, and not think about any legal repercussions or whatever. But it's just the penny is made of zinc. Through the ages, it's been made of steel, uh, and then now zinc, but it's plated with copper. So that idea of almost like a decoy is not a real thing, right? So once I take it, I could also make it a non-real thing and look like almost a real thing, like look like red or look like gold. So that same idea of the process of making currency, right? Like a piece of paper is printed, but with just inscriptions now it's $100 bill, and that could buy you something. But what if that somebody else takes another piece of paper? So now you have Bitcoin, which is like an illusion, yet there are standards and agreements of common and belief makes it almost a valuable object. And it's like $100,000, but it doesn't exist. So that same concept is what I used to do this, but I don't really care about the legal side.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It's amazing. That's the conversation you talk about, Penny, reminds me of the idea of diamonds too, right? We have unlimited resource of diamond, but then because the people who control the diamond, they decide to how much to be available on world. That's like material become extremely valuable. Similar with currency, and I'm especially really touched with your public project, like this versus the gallery pieces, because I also do feel like the vacuum galleries that decides who are be able to see the work, and then and the public pieces, even like at the beginning you showed when you showed in Ghana the piece and people are touching or getting your pennies. And so I also got touched about because we have different understanding with privacy and property and ownership, right? And so just asking how do you, what's the plan for the public sculptures, and do you have any upcoming public events, for the public sculptures?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Before I answer that, from my historical heritage, like art was objects that were domestic. We carved stools, sculptures were used to actually perform duties. Like it was used as seats. It was used as things that you could cook with or do stuff with. So the thought, and even that helped me branch into this kind of sculptural element or sculptural painting element, is the thought that the idea that paintings had to be still or art has to be still, and then people had to stop and look at it, was very Western ideologies. So in the same way, be it as it may that I have gallery shows or institutional shows where the works are frozen, that those ones has like a historical political departure that throws people into research, into understanding context. And then you have these ones where people just encounter it, or the other works that people encounter it. My next project is in, and maybe I'm not supposed to say, but it's in Abu Dhabi, but it's going to be one of my biggest projects, and it's in a public space. But think about it, where like all your money, so much wealth, how do you make art that in a place where, I mean, contemporary art is just starting, and there, most of the art is also very functional. You have it on the architecture, you have it in their religion and stuff like that. So how do you make like contemporary art that departs from that almost like ideologies into something else. So yeah, man, what is going to keep me busy in the studio for the next maybe 4 or 5 months is making like a 40, 50 meter piece in an outdoor space. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
So I actually am curious about, have you had any thoughts about visiting the locations where this copper is being mined? I lived 5 minutes from the deepest mine in the world in Utah. Yeah, in Bingham Canyon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And have you ever visited it? Have you got a chance to? I'm curious if that kind of interaction, because that's being mined in a space that's actually causing a lot of issues with our air quality, which puts us at like the second worst city in the world for our air quality. So we got some cool records going on there. But yeah, so I'm curious of that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that project for a long time now, and I will actually at some point before I used the coins, I came to Philly to the mint, and that changed the work. Actually, that changed me to using more of the steel and other metals because the lady at the front desk after the tour gave me a pack, but it had one penny and then one blank. I guess I'll call it penny, like a circle, but it wasn't stamped or anything. So that was like, wow, so this comes from this emptiness. So yeah, I think about spaces, but I think when I think about Utah, I'm thinking of public installations or something that almost interacts with that space. It would take me a long time to do, but I really do have it in thought.
It would be incredible. Just saying, because it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
one of the coolest looking things. And then you have Great Salt Lake that could help you with that chemical reaction too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Somebody else will talk.
I'll give you this. Maybe.
Can I ask, sorry,
Please go ahead.
I'm curious about how do you think about your currency work? Because it's like money. When you work and put your works in the gallery, like art capitalism, now as an artist, we need a lot of money for survival. And how do you negotiate with this capitalism and this currency work? Thank you.
Oh yeah. Well, just fun fact, I'm not rich, because all my money is like into these pennies. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting when you think about the idea that art becomes like a valuable asset in itself. It moves from just a canvas to be priced for like $500 million, and it was just paint. So when I use the actual money, and now people are buying money for the several thousands or so, like I think that that idea is interesting. And as an artist, like I guess sometimes you just have to go straight to the point. You know what I mean? I didn't like the idea of painting about the subject. How about using the subject in itself as the tool to pose questions or spark that interrogation or interaction? That's why I like using it. But most of my money goes into getting pennies. Yeah, go for it.
Double dipping and asking two questions. This one's really pragmatic. A project like the one on the screen, you said is near your studio in Brooklyn, correct?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Was it, did you do it guerrilla and just show up and hang that stuff? Or did you work with an agency that promotes like temporary public art? Or, did they sanction it, so to speak? Or did you just show up with your stuff and do it and hope for the best?
Oh hell no, I didn't work with any institutions. I just did it self-funded, did the work and then showed up and had it out for a few weeks. Yeah. Okay. And then the Public Arts of New York reached out that we could do something, but I don't want to.
Any last questions? Okay.
Well, thank you for being here, first of all. I was especially struck by your piece that had to do with the steel mill. And it is a strong environmental statement from my perspective. And sometimes it's difficult to make both an aesthetic and an environmental a statement that really works together and still has the impact. So I want to compliment you on the piece where you use the actual steel, then you use pipes, and then you used the steam. And the steam for me reminded me, I grew up in Chicago, so I know the steel mills in Gary, Indiana, and how they functioned, how important they were to the economy. And so I thought that piece pulled together a lot of ideas. The aging, the crumbling, the coloring of the steel as it ages. And then when you added the pipes and the steam reminded me of when we would drive from Gary to Chicago and see this red haze all over the city. And then you would see the steam coming up. So it makes a very, very powerful statement about the environment, about the closing of the mills, and about what went on there. I could almost see the people still rolling out those slabs of steel, because every child in Chicago had to go to the steel mills to see how steel is made. So that is a wonderful piece. And I would also I am complimenting you on your strong sense of design that is beginning to show very carefully when you translate some of the images into those geometric forms and so forth. And I must say your work has changed. I saw that earlier exhibition when you first started to use pennies. It was in Accra and with a group of young artists experimenting with hair, and Bernard Jackson was in the show. So I know that whole show, and what you have now progressed, morphed into is very outstanding.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
One more question and we will be done. Okay. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your process? How do you achieve the gold or the other iridescent colors? I'm curious.
I know a lot of people are. I'll try not to share them, but it's copper, and it reacts in itself with almost everything. And I saw that even architecturally, a lot of buildings have copper claddings that nature in itself play on it. So I just used a little bit of it's very experimental. A lot of failures, and then the accidents become, oh, the new color that I get. But oftentimes not so scientific in its apparatus, like using very ordinary objects. You could achieve almost anything. And now I do that same processes or similar processes with steel. And yeah, so I'm trying not to share them. Yeah, but a lot of experimentation, I would say.
All right. Thank you so much, Yaw, for sharing this. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And be also reminded that we would have the talk on the Arts and Architecture YouTube channel. So make sure you rewatch that. Thank you so much for coming.